Something has changed about the food you are eating, and you already know it, you have felt it, you just have not quite been able to put it into words yet. Britain has more food than at any point in its history, more variety, more choice, more availability, supermarkets the size of aircraft hangars, open every day of the week, and yet 64% of adults in England are classified as overweight or obese. 10% of children are living with obesity before they even start secondary school, and British children, your grandchildren, have the highest levels of ultra-processed food consumption of any country in Europe. Not Europe excluding the good countries, all of Europe, the highest. That is not bad luck. That is not a sudden national collapse in willpower. That is what happens when a food system quietly, fundamentally change, and the people eating from it are never told. Today, we are going through exactly what shifted, why it happened, and what it is doing to British bodies. Because once you understand it, a lot of things stop feeling confusing. The bloating that became normal, the afternoon fog, the hunger that comes back an hour after a full meal, the tiredness after eating. Once you see what is actually happening, you cannot unsee it. Part 1. British food stopped behaving like food, and most people have not noticed, because the change was gradual enough that each step felt unremarkable. Think about the last loaf of bread you bought from Tesco, Sainsbury's, or Asda. How long did it sit in your kitchen before anything happened to it? 2 weeks? 3? Now think about what bread actually is. Flour, water, yeast, salt, organic matter. If left alone, real bread goes stale within days and develops mold not long after. That is not a flaw. That is biology working exactly as it should. Spoilage is a signal, the process where microbial life breaks down organic matter, the way nature has always worked. So why does your supermarket bread not do that anymore? The answer is in the ingredient list. Calcium propionate, the synthetic preservative that tells mold not to show up. Datum, diacetyl tartaric acid esters of mono and diglycerides, an industrial emulsifier that makes bread elastic, water-resistant, and commercially stable across long distribution chains from a factory in the Midlands to a shelf in Aberdeen. That rubbery, spongy texture you have noticed in virtually every commercially produced British loaf. That was a design choice for a logistics system, and not for your stomach. These formulations were not made with your digestion in mind. They were made for trucks and warehouses and the supply chain that spans a country. Your gut has been processing organic matter for hundreds of thousands of years. It registers the difference even when you do not have the language yet to describe what feels off. Part 2. Your body has been trying to tell you, and the British medical establishment has now formally confirmed it. In February 2026, the British Medical Association published a major report called Improving the Nation's Health, the Impact of Ultra-Processed Food. It was not fringe, it was not alternative medicine, it was the BMA, the professional association representing the doctors treating British patients every single day. The report was explicit. The UK's current approach to regulating, producing, marketing, and distributing food is failing to protect public health. 66% of children's daily energy intake comes from ultra-processed foods. Over 70% of school lunches, whether prepared at home or at school, are made up of these products. The BMA Board of Science Chair stated directly, relying on voluntary measures has failed, and responsibility cannot be placed solely on families when unhealthy food is so heavily promoted. This is not a personal failure. Research from the universities of Cambridge and Bristol, analysing data from the UK National Diet and Nutrition Survey, found that mean ultra-processed food consumption among British adolescents accounted for 66% of total daily energy intake, and higher in children from disadvantaged backgrounds, where the figure rose above 68%. That is not a coincidence. That is a system that concentrates its least nutritious products in the areas of the country least able to resist or avoid them. And here is the most uncomfortable number in the BMA report. Obesity rates among 10 and 11-year-old children in the UK have increased by over 700% in the past 30 years, 700%, and rates of severe childhood obesity by over 1,600%. The human genome does not reorganize itself in 30 years. Individual choices do not spontaneously converge into population-wide metabolic collapse. Food systems do that. Environments do that. The reason the connection is difficult to feel in real time is that the body's response is delayed. You do not feel it at the table. You feel it the next morning or 2 days later. The feedback loop is long enough that your brain never draws the clean line between what you ate and how your body feels. So the body adjusts. Lower energy becomes your new normal. Digestion that is off more days than it is right becomes simply how things are. And once a symptom feels normal, it stops registering as a signal. Part 3. The system broke the natural clock, and British food moved faster than biology was ever designed to keep up with. The average commercial chicken raised for the British food supply reaches slaughter weight in approximately 6 weeks. In the 1950s, that same process took 12 to 16 weeks. The bird was not bred by evolution to grow at twice the speed. It was selectively engineered, fed high-caloric formulas, in and raised in conditions optimized for output velocity. That acceleration changes the nutritional composition of the meat, the tissue structure, and what your body actually receives when you eat it. It produces a documented structural abnormality called woody breast, a condition where muscle fibers develop with abnormal rigidity because the bird grew too fast for its biology to keep pace. That is the oddly textured chicken that does not pull apart the way you would expect. It is not a minor aesthetic quirk. It is the direct physical consequence of a food system built around speed rather than biology. The same pattern runs through British produce. Modern commercial vegetables and fruit sold through Tesco, Sainsbury's, Morrison's, and Asda are bred almost entirely for yield, visual consistency, and surviving the journey from wherever they were grown to wherever you are buying them. Research published in the Journal of the American College of Nutrition tracked measurable declines in magnesium, zinc, iron, and vitamin C across dozens of fruits and vegetables when comparing mid-century nutritional profiles to more recent data. Faster growth means less time in soil absorbing minerals. A tomato grown in 3 weeks carries a fraction of the nutritional content of one that took 8. The caloric value may be similar. The biological complexity is not. Part 4. More on the label, less in the food. And the gap between what the British food system promises and what it actually delivers has never been wider. The British food supply has never had more products, more options, more ingredients listed on every package. And yet the BMA confirmed in its February 2026 report what nutrition researchers have been documenting for years. The UK is second only to the United States as one of the world's largest consumers of ultra-processed food, with approximately 56% of daily energy intake coming from these products. The Lancet, in November 2025, described the situation in terms that had not previously been used in a medical journal of that standing. Ultra-processed food is a corporate-engineered public health crisis. That was The Lancet, not a tabloid, not a wellness blog. Here is a specific example that matters. But the word enriched on virtually every commercial British white bread label means that natural nutrients were stripped out during heavy industrial processing and synthetic versions were added back in controlled doses to make the nutritional panel look acceptable. The vitamins listed on the label were not naturally present in the bread. They were removed and partially replaced. Synthetic folic acid behaves differently in the body from folic acid obtained from whole food sources. It requires conversion by the liver before it becomes metabolically usable. From the end of 2026, the UK government will require flour fortification with folic acid as a mandatory measure, not because the food is nourishing enough, but specifically because it is not. And neural tube defect risk in pregnant women requires a supplementary intervention. That is the official policy acknowledgement in plain terms that what is being sold as bread is not delivering the nutrition that the name implies. Post-Brexit, Britain has been navigating the question of what food standards to maintain, adopt, or diverge from. The EU banned titanium dioxide used as a whitening agent in confectionery and other products after the European Food Safety Authority could not rule out DNA damage. The UK's position on titanium dioxide has been subject to review. Bisphenol A restrictions are tightening in EU food packaging from July 2026. PFAS restrictions in food packaging begin in Europe from August 2026. The UK is managing these decisions independently through the Food Standards Agency, which operates under a different regulatory philosophy from the European Precautionary Standard. Whether that divergence works in the interest of British consumers is a question the available health data answers with some clarity. If this is changing how you think about what you have been eating every day, without question. Subscribe to this channel right now. This is the kind of investigation we run every week, and there is more coming that you need to hear. Part 5. It was built for the supply chain, not for you. Here is the most important thing to understand about modern British food, and it almost never gets said plainly enough. The bread on the Tesco shelf, the ready meal from Sainsbury's, the chicken fillets in the Asda freezer. These products were not designed with your digestive system as the primary consideration. They were designed for stability in transit. For the lorry from the processing facility in Lincolnshire to the distribution centre in Northampton to the store in Newcastle. For 3 weeks on a shelf under fluorescent lights for a margin structure that requires consistent output at volume pricing. Biological compatibility with the human gut comes somewhere further down the design brief. Sometimes it does not make the list at all. Research published in Nature and Gut linked two common emulsifiers, carboxymethylcellulose and polysorbate 80, to disruptions in gut microbiota and increased intestinal inflammation in animal models. These emulsifiers are present throughout commercially produced food sold in British supermarkets. Your gut lining evolved over hundreds of thousands of years to interact with whole foods, naturally occurring fats, and complex fibers. And it was not designed to process chemically stabilized formulations engineered to remain shelf-stable for weeks. IBS diagnoses in Britain have been rising for decades. Chronic acid reflux, persistent bloating, and digestive dysfunction are now so widespread that they are treated as unremarkable features of modern British life rather than as symptoms worth investigating. They are not unremarkable. They are accurate feedback from a digestive system that is encountering food it was not built to process. Part 6. The rules changed. And not in the interest of British consumers. The food industry in Britain has operated for decades on the principle of voluntary compliance. Voluntary targets for salt reduction, voluntary reformulation pledges, voluntary commitments to reduce sugar. If the BMA has now stated this explicitly and publicly, voluntary measures have failed. They failed not because companies are uniquely dishonest, but because voluntary measures serve the interest of companies whose commercial model depends on selling exactly the products that voluntary measures are supposed to reduce. The incentive structure is wrong when cheaper ingredients, longer shelf life, and faster production are rewarded by the market and health consequences surface 15 years later in NHS waiting rooms. The feedback loop between commercial decision and public health outcome is too long for the market to correct itself. A small number of corporations control the overwhelming majority of processed food sold through British supermarkets. If the concentration of the British food manufacturing sector means that the gap between commercial interest and regulatory oversight gets very tight when the same companies lobby government, fund industry bodies, sponsor research chairs at universities, and sit on advisory panels that shape the policies intended to govern them. The BMA report acknowledged this conflict of interest explicitly, calling for increased industry accountability and reduced industry influence over food policy. When the professional body representing British doctors has to publish a formal report calling for the food industry to be removed from health policy advisory roles, that tells you something clear about how those roles have been used. Part 7. You were never told this was a choice. The modern British food system is not built around nourishment as its primary objective. It is built around convenience, speed, portability, and minimal preparation time. That transformation built over roughly 40 years as lifestyles changed, working hours increased, real wages stagnated, and food corporations moved quickly to fill the gap. Ultra-processed food is pre-cooked, pre-seasoned, pre-stabilized, and engineered to deliver immediate sensory satisfaction with minimum effort or cost. When convenience becomes the dominant design constraint, specific biological trade-offs follow automatically. Fiber complexity decreases because it makes texture inconsistent. Fermentation disappears because it is slow and cannot be standardized at industrial scale. Food structure simplifies, and the gut microbiome, which depends on diversity and varied microbial exposure to function correctly, gets fewer and fewer of the inputs it evolved to need. The result is a British population that is simultaneously overfed and malnourished, full but not satisfied, consuming adequate calories from products that have had the biological complexity engineered out of them in service of a system built for output rather than health. The costs of this do not show up in a corporate quarterly report. They show up in NHS waiting times, in GP appointment backlogs, in the chronic disease burden that is now the dominant challenge facing British public health. The NHS is stretched to breaking point, and the food system that created the conditions requiring that healthcare has no incentive to change on its own. Here is what all of this actually means. If food is information, and biologically it is, then what you eat every single day is not just fueling your body, it is programming it. Your metabolism, your immune system, your gut, your neurological chemistry. British food has been quietly moving in one direction for 40 years. More processing, less biological complexity, more additives, greater distance between the person eating and the origin of what they are eating. The consequences are documented and they are not subtle. British children are the highest ultra-processed food consumers in Europe. British adults are among the top 2 consumers in the world. Obesity rates in children have increased by 700% in a generation. The BMA is calling for urgent government action. The Lancet has used the words corporate engineered crisis. And the NHS is being asked to treat the downstream consequences of a food system that nobody chose and most people do not know they are living inside. You watch this video. That already puts you ahead of the majority of people eating these products who have never been told any of this. Not because it is secret information, because the system works better when you do not know. Subscribe to this channel right now for more British consumer investigations that give you the clear picture without the conflict of interest that sits inside every publication taking food industry advertising. Share this with someone in your life who has been blaming themselves for how they feel. And tell us in the comments, what was the moment something first fell off to you about the food? We read every comment. See you in the next one.